You're incognito. Okay, we're live.
All right, excellent. Good evening, Millis, and good evening to my colleagues, friends, neighbors, and business owners. I'm Loring Barnes. I'm the chair of the Millis Select Board, and tonight is a special one-topic meeting on June 8, 2020. Specifically, it is to get our businesses up and running as expeditiously as possible within state safety and health guidelines. And as Karen does that, I'm trying to find a document.
That's okay.
That,
Do you want to put something else up? That's fine.
nope, that's fine.
And whichever you want to do it, I figured I'd put the permit right up there.
Hang on a second.
I'm going back and forth.
So the purpose of tonight is to leave and emerge with the local licensing authority, which for Millis is the select board, to have codified policies by which restaurants and bars can open successfully by innovatively, but still lawfully and safely use new outside spaces that will be both protective and respectful of both their workforce as well as the community. So what I'm proposing tonight is that I introduce the topic, the journey that got us to this point, and then I'm going to turn this over to our Director of Economic Development by way of our town administrator so that everybody has the background. I know that we have a lot of businesses who are interested in this, and believe me, we share your interests. So does that sound like a fair approach? Okay, great. So our town council provided us with a summary opinion which says the select board may develop a process for approving restaurant expansion into parking lots, sidewalks, patios, and other grounds regardless for Mass General Law Chapter 40A, which is the Zoning Enabling Act. But in order for us to proceed with that flexibility, we have to establish a policy. I want everybody to know that while the coming to phase 2 was not a surprise, that the town stakeholder subject experts, those who are in charge of our public safety and our public health departments, were understandably reticent about putting any guideline draft into place when we really had no idea what the state was going to do. We actually contacted our state legislative delegation about the outcome that was going to be very helpful to all, and that is the shift in the role of the Alcohol Beverage Control Board. So the state guidelines were dated June 1st. They were received by our town on June 2nd. A meeting with the town leadership that governs health, safety, and building space permitting, led by our Economic Development and Planning Director, Bob Weiss. Somebody chiming in? No, sorry. No. Was held on Wednesday, June 3rd. Our reopening task force, which provided input sessions with restaurant owners in particular, was again led by Bob Weiss. That was Thursday, June 4th. We have open meeting law requirements, so today's meeting was posted on the 4th, and the governor on Saturday, for those of you who weren't trying to duck the deluge, announced phase 2 on Saturday, but didn't really remind everybody that might have been tuned in that while he's relaxed guidelines at the state level, it does require the municipal policy to be established. So here we are, it's June 8th. I want to thank and acknowledge my colleagues on the board, Jim McCaffrey and Peter Germain, our town administrator, Mike Kaczynski, Karen Beret, and most especially both our public safety chiefs and our director of the Board of Health, who have helped to get us here. And I want to acknowledge that I have heard from a lot of restaurateurs, and we share your angst, we share your desire to get rolling. And I want to say that those of you who have been in any way frustrated and felt like Millis was slow to advance and have compared the readiness of other towns, I do think it's appropriate to tell you that the towns that were often cited in those conversations were towns with very robust, dedicated economic development staff, and we happen to, thankfully, have a one-quarter economic development and planning officer in Bob Weiss, who has just been doing Herculean duty. There's been a lot of work that's been going on behind the scenes, and so what I'm going to do is, by way of the town administrator, ask him to introduce to Bob, and the overview of what we will be discussing is a streamlined application that has the input of the business sector at issue. So we'll be looking at a restaurant outdoor seating application, how alcohol sales will be handled, and maintaining the requirements for food and health safety to include social distancing. So with that, I'm going to ask our town administrator to take it from here. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As you had mentioned, the governor issued an order on June 1st allowing for businesses to serve food and alcohol in some circumstances in an outdoor setting upon the beginning of phase 2 of the COVID phase program. And then the governor just this past Saturday, indicated or confirmed that today is the first day of that process. We did work last week to gather the information necessary to prepare for this. Again, I also thank the board members for meeting on fairly short notice to fast track this item so that we can get the restaurants having this opportunity as soon as possible. And I can say a lot of work went into this last week. And I want to, before the board gets into this in detail, I do want to thank both Bob Weiss, who's done a lot of work on this, as well as Karen Beret, and also the chiefs, the building commissioner, and the health director for all their input and assistance in putting this together. And really, that's really the only introduction I wanted to put forward. And then, with your indulgence, Madam Chair, ask our Economic Development Director to talk a little bit about the application, the policy, and the process, and then take any questions that the board may have in regards to this.
Yes, that sounds great. And what I would encourage is for especially those restaurateurs who are looking at this very tactically, I would encourage you to jot down questions because this will be an open forum for you to ask them as well. And
I want a question from over here.
Pardon? I don't know. Somebody's on. I think Carolyn, you're unmuted. So what we can do is we'll go through, and I think to set everybody's expectations, our goal is to give us a policy that will really give us the springboard to get going, but I would not be surprised if down the road there was some modification that needed to be done with it. And just for ambient noise, if you're not actively speaking, it would be really helpful if you muted yourself, because then other people aren't distracted by the normal noises in the background. Okay, so I guess, Mr. Weiss, if you're ready.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'd just like to reiterate what Mr. Kaczynski had mentioned about our staff here. We put together this meeting really on quick notice, and many members of the staff came to this and have put a lot of thought, a lot of input into this. In what is basically a permit to go on for a restaurant to go onto the sidewalk. I don't have that much to say, but generally this replicates the process for a restaurant to move its operations outdoor that already exists, but it removes a lot of the time-consuming requirements for public hearings and professional services. By my estimate, it saves about 6 to perhaps 8 weeks in the permitting process and several thousands of dollars. What we have here is basically a 2-page form, which includes, the most important part is that it's going to include a narrative and a drawing. Not a professional drawing is required, that the town staff folks can review and that we can turn around quickly. I'm saying here, it says here is a goal, it's 24 hours or as soon as we can. but that's how fast we would like to turn it around. Basically, going to go through it on a step-by-step basis, we can do that, but it's a form that we will have out tomorrow. Once this gets approved tonight, we'll have the form out tomorrow. People will be able to pick it up either here at Town Hall in the front steps, or they'll be able to pick it up online. We'll have it available online. Just go to the Town Hall website. If you're a restaurant operator, go to the Town Hall website, and on the front page, it'll give you it'll give you a link to the application. So I'm kind of saying that right now in hopes that Karen Bure remembers, reminds me to get this out of the town site.
I certainly will, Bob.
Basically, what you do is you see it's a form. It's 2 pages. Basic information that we need from you, who you are, contact information, and it's the narrative, I think, that's important. What do you want to do? How are you going to move out? And a drawing that shows what you're going to do. What you need to do, keep in mind, is that you need to do this according to the guidelines that the governor put out that are available on what's the website? mass.gov/recovery, or reopening, mass.gov/reopening, I believe it is. And the guidelines will be there for you. How many feet between tables, all sorts, what kind of posters or safety equipment or whatever you need to make this space available, it will be there. And so you fill out your narrative, say, this is what I'd like to do, describe the drawing if you can, as well as you can, and submit us the drawing. That you just drop back into the general drop box that's in front of Town Hall. The staff will come down on a regular basis throughout the day, because I know there may be a lot of people applying throughout the day. That will go to the town clerk, who will stamp it. Then the town clerk will send it on to this office, the town administrator's office, where it will get sent out primarily to 4 other staff people, the building department, the Board of Health, fire chief, and police chief, but any other staff that we think might be involved. Staff will look it over, and they can right away turn it back to us with their approval, or and if it is approved, we will send it back to the town clerk. We filed. If there's liquor involved, we have to send it back to the town clerk, and then we'll make a copy for ABCD. But once the clerk has received it from the town administrator's office, all approved, then it's immediately effective, and we will let you know. So that's why we need your contact information. We need telephone numbers as well as email address so that we can contact you. If you submit an application to us and it is not accepted, is not approved, we will let you know that as well. Again, we need your contact information. So we will let you know as well. We'll tell you what part of it is not within the guidelines and or violates some other guidelines, and we'll let you know how to correct that, or at least we'll discuss with you how to correct that. That's pretty much what I have to say. It's a very general overview. I think you see the graphic that's on the Zoom board right now, and that is really I think there's 11 points there. You know, we can go through that if you wish.
At this point, I think what would make sense, the bottom line, Bob, is people just want to know where do I get this form, assuming that we approve it, where do I get it, and where do I file it? They just need those simple pieces of information, and then after that, I'm going to ask my colleagues to weigh in with any specific questions.
You can get hard copy of it tomorrow. Again, it's approved today. You can get a hard copy of it tomorrow on the front steps of Town Hall. We'll have it available there. Or you can go onto the town website, millisma.gov, And on the front page of our town website will be a link to the form itself, and then you can just link onto the form and you'll have it printed out. And the second part of your question is, where do I return it? Same place. You cannot return it electronically, but you can just return it to the front steps of Town Hall.
And just for my edification, why can't it be returned electronically?
Let me think about that. We're doing a lot of this on our feet. If it's returned, I want to make sure it gets to the right place, for one thing. So we have to give you a definite address where to return it. I would say return it to me, but that's a difficult thing to say. That's why I'd say, return it in hard copy. That way we don't have to be responsible for printing out a hard copy and taking it down. We also require a signature on page 3, so it would be hard. I guess you could sign it, scan it, and send it to me. But again, it would just be cleaner if you can return it to Town Hall, to the front steps.
Madam Chair, if I might, I mean, certainly in the interest of time, if an applicant wants to email a PDF copy to Mr. Weiss, they can do so. I believe on the form is Bob's email address. We just follow up and drop off a signed copy, as soon as possible, but that we can start the process, as soon, if we get it through Bob's email first before we get it through, a hard copy, we can start acting on it, but we'd like a hard copy for our files sent to us.
Okay, so on page, let me follow that one up then. On the third page, is where it says, right under the bold, all businesses are responsible for the state's COVID-19 guidelines. You'll see it says, for further questions, please contact. And that's where you have my email address, rweiss@millisma.gov. So that would be fine.
And just to chime in, Madam Chair, I think as Bob was working on this, we talked about that the town clerk was going to be the kind of starting point for this form. The town clerk is used to having to stamp items in, get a date stamp on that. So if we're trying to use our 24-hour turnaround time and do our best to get things back and get you guys out there and running, like you said, if it gets emailed to Bob, we can certainly bring it down, get them to time stamp it, and move forward from there.
Do any of my colleagues have any comments or specific questions before I open it up to the business owners to express any concerns or ask questions? I'll start with the board, and then perhaps our Board of Health Director and Public Safety Officers might say something.
Madam Chair?
Please.
Yes, I want to make sure that it's clear to everyone that basically we have two categories, as I look at it, of businesses. We have 23 businesses in town that have common victual licenses, which means they are able to sell food on the premises. So potentially those are people who might be interested in moving outside. Of the 23, we have 8 that have either all alcohol or beer and wine. So from my perspective, what we're considering is allowing the 8 to apply for the alcohol license as well for outside. But I'm concerned that if one of the other 15, if I do my calculations correct, are looking to institute an alcohol license, I'm not sure that that's something we want to do at this point.
And if I could chime in on that, so that's not permissible under the governor's order. This is for existing licensees. In terms of the alcohol, this is for existing licensees. It's an expansion of the licensed premises, because the way it works for liquor licenses is if you have a restaurant, you have to have a very detailed schematic when you apply for that liquor license with the town. And and you're not allowed to serve alcohol beyond those borders. So this just allows the expansion of the area where you can use your existing license. No new licenses can be created. EBCC won't allow for that because, as Bob mentioned earlier, unlike the normal liquor licensing scheme process, where the ABCC has final approval, there's no approval process by the ABCC. Rather, we just notify them that they're temporarily expanding the licensed premises. So that solves that for anyone who's concerned out there, one of the residents or a business owner who's looking to get a liquor license. This is not at all the process to do so.
So what we're saying is that it's the 8 with the existing liquor license that may apply, and the balance of those with a common vic, they can apply, but only for a restaurant, a sidewalk restaurant, or an outdoor restaurant. Without, sure. We have one establishment, which I'm not sure this would apply to, that has alcohol on premises, which is Ryan Family Amusements. They do have a license. I'm not sure that they're allowed to open at this point under the guidelines of bowling alley. I'm not sure, but
I think, Kate, sorry if I could just chime in. I think, Jim, from what I read, you also have to be serving food, and they don't make food there, right?
yeah, they don't have a common vicular license either.
Right. So I think you have to be serving food. Is that right, Kate?
So if they don't have, it's actually, the way they define in the order is a food permit issued by the Board of Health, which is food for serve.
Okay, that's right, yeah.
Food. So it's not even your bars that might have, a jar of pickles or some peanuts or something like that. It doesn't apply to those entities either.
Right.
You have to serve prepared food.
Well, I'm just trying to get a sense for the public can understand the scope of this.
Right.
I mean, at one level, we are not trying to license 250 establishments. We have 3 at the most, 8 of whom have liquor licenses, and I'm sure some of the 23 might look at it and say it's just not worth it because of their location. And maybe it's the fairly temporary nature of this anyway. We hope that it's sooner rather than later we'll move to the next phase. So I just want to make sure that people understand the constraints that we have. So it's really an application for alcohol expansion and or business, like a victor's license. That's what there's 2 things here. That's what we're dealing with.
I don't want to be rude. I just want to reference, I failed to introduce town council, who just chimed in for Mr. McCaffrey's question. And she is not Jeff. She's borrowing her husband's account. That is attorney Kate Federoff from Mead Tellerman Costa, our town law firm. So I just wanted to make sure everybody knew who she was. I apologize for that. And I'll let you guys go back to that exchange. And I'm just going to ask all the business owners to let me just get through the town leadership first, and then we'll make sure to go through your questions.
And Lauren, I have to chime in. Jeff isn't my husband either. He's a colleague, so.
Sorry.
Dad.
It's all a public record,
I apologize. Congratulations, what your husband doesn't know. Okay, so I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Did you have anything else to add to what Mr. McCaffrey?
So, I hope that people understand that the 24-hour objective will, to some degree, depend on the timeliness of someone's application. We would hope that you'd be able to put the application together as quickly as possible and not look too many to come in, at 5 o'clock on Friday.
Is the one downstairs?
No. I can't try.
Somebody's not muted.
And
Correct, Jim, if I may, correct, we discussed that today. It has to get signed off by several different departments. Our hope, though, we're going to do our darndest to try to get these things turned around for people to help out. We put the 24 hours. We know we're going to try to get it on everybody's desk right away. Obviously, if we have questions, we're hoping we can reach out and still be able to turn this around in a very timely fashion for people. This is new for us, too, so...
Yeah, I would prefer language within 1 business day. I mean, that really
Okay.
says, look, if you get it in on a Friday, we may not be able to get it to you. So if you get it in on Tuesday, we hope to get it back to you on Wednesday.
Right,
That always just seems a little awkward to me, that's all.
right.
And I do have a concern about item 11,
Which is, let me go back to that then, hold on.
conversation on, which is the sidewalks.
Yes, that is a good question.
I'm not sure. This one is a little more complicated because this is serving alcohol on town property, which is what this is addressing, whether it's sidewalks or parking lots. First of all, I don't like the language that says takeout order. I think that's not what we're doing here. You have to be served by the restaurant at a table that the restaurant is sponsoring, if you will. And I'm concerned about the approval of said licenses has to be by the select board. Well, that means this won't happen for weeks because the board is not going to meet every week. So I'm not sure that this may be an aspiration which we can't deliver on. That's my concern here. And as I went around town and I kind of looked at the establishments, certainly the ones right on Exchange Street are the most likely to, I suppose, want to try to use that sidewalk, which is pretty small. The restaurants and whatnot in Toyota's Plaza aren't going to have an issue with us. I mean, they'd have to get permission from the landlord, not from the town. So I'm not sure this is something that I fully understand what this means. What's the demand for this, first of all? And then how would we actually do it in a way that makes sense for these businesses over the next few weeks?
Jim, can I chime in here for a sec? I think we can, on the one language issue, I think we can easily, I agree, the takeout order piece sounds a little tricky because you're thinking like takeout pizza or something, so.
That's because it says takeout order.
Yeah.
Not that tricky.
I'm a real detective. So I think we can strike that part where it says as part of the takeout order, and we could say for on-premise, for on-site consumption, on-premise consumption, something like that. That's easy. Now, for the sidewalk, and I can't claim at all to know the feasibility based on the constraints of your sidewalks and where these facilities are located. In our mind, that is something that should require Board of Selectmen vote. Unlike the others where we're saying a delegation is defensible, it concerns me to have, because a license, as you know, or for the public, is you're giving away essentially a property right temporarily. So it's like a lease is when you own your house, you own all of it. It's called a bundle of sticks. A license, you're giving a little piece away of it temporarily, and that's why it really should be left with the Board of Selectmen to grant that license. I do have a form. It's easy to do. You could even do it on a consent agenda. But the 48-hour posting and all of those things, they become a little bit difficult and cumbersome for sure.
Well, I don't want to create a process and a policy that nobody really needs. That's, I guess, what I'd like to understand better is the need from the business's point of view for this kind of provision.
Right. If I could chime in there, the key word here is subject to the execution of a license agreement. So let's say a restaurant on Exchange Street wanted to move out onto the sidewalk because it's the only place they have. They can't move to the parking lot. All they have is a sidewalk in front of them. They can't just move out to the sidewalk without some sort of permission from the town. That's usually a lease or something like that. We should make that as easy to acquire as we can. But as Mr. McCaffrey said, there's not much space out there. So one of the things, and we've spoken about this a lot, we've discussed this a lot in the last week. How does the Americans with Disability Act affect this? If you put a table in front of your window on Exchange Street, what happens if you leave enough room for a wheelchair to get by? You need, I think it's 42 inches. So that's why it says subject to the execution of an agreement. I mean, a restaurant will have to come to town hall and say, can I use the sidewalk? probably add that in with their application for the permit, and then we can start talking with them about that at the same time.
Yeah, I guess the message first of all, I'd like to understand if there are businesses that really want to do this, because it makes it more important to have a good situation here, and be able to evaluate all the rules and regulations. But if there's no demand, then why would we spend time worrying about it?
True, and I don't know if there's any demand.
I believe the restaurants of the Roach Brothers Plaza would be interested in having access to the sidewalk, so it may be the definition of what's a town sidewalk versus a landlord-owned sidewalk that needs to be negotiated. That may be the distinction.
Well,
But
yeah, this has nothing to do with Roach Brothers. This is the town-owned.
Okay.
If somebody wants to do that in a private setting, all we're asking them to do is tell us that the private party has agreed to it.
Right, draw it up.
Right, and we do ask that question in the application.
I mean, I don't favor setting up rules and regulations where there's no need for them. But if somebody really needs this, I guess I'd like to know, and then they need to know that this process could take more than 48 hours, that's for sure.
Right, and I think we didn't know whether there was anyone who would be taking advantage of that ourselves. Again, we discussed this a lot, so I figured we'd put it in there. If there was someone who wanted to, they would come to us. In the case of 20 out of 23 of these restaurants didn't need it, we didn't have to worry about it.
Well, this happens to be the article I was most concerned with myself. And again, I think it comes down to a lot of different issues here. My colleague has named some of them. I'm concerned about policing it. What is the impact on abutters or other businesses on either side of wherever that restaurant may be, particularly in places like Exchange Street. I tend to agree that we need to find out if anybody even has an interest in this, because I think it becomes problematic. I mean, in my estimation, I don't know how you make the sidewalk on Exchange accessible and still deal with disability issues, adjacent to butters, a whole bunch of other things. It's not that I wouldn't want to, don't get me wrong. I know what we're trying to do, but I don't want to see us spinning our wheels if no one there has an interest in doing this.
So, I think we're looking at specifically Saigon and the Italian Groceria. The Italian Groceria does have a couple of tables, and we'll probably be able, there's a driveway that's available, and potentially if the owners of Victory Lane that own the parking lot that's kind of up to the side of the building between it and Stacked, that would be more of a private negotiation. But I think Saigon in particular has never had outdoor seating, and they've been a restaurant of an incredibly important member of the community for, I think, 20 years. So I think offering them some sort of a solution would be really important. And I also don't think anybody would begrudge going around the sidewalk under the circumstances. I can't imagine a situation where people are going to complain given what's been going on. Mr. McCaffrey, do you have any other concerns? Because I would like to get yours and Mr. Germain's and ask anybody else, because I know that there are business owners that want to chime in.
I do have a issue that I'd like to address with respect to the form itself. And this gets at representations that are made by the businesses that they're in compliance with all of the requirements that are set forth in the the governor's reopening order. I think if we're going to do this, we have to have an affirmative statement by the business that they have complied, not simply saying that they make reference to it. I think that that's really important. And we're asking them to do it anyway. And my question is, yes, since the guidelines have a list I would prefer if we didn't simply tell the business to go find the list, but instead we provided it to them. It's just one less step to follow.
Mr. McCaffrey, if you, on the third page, the second of, the third page, just above the applicant's signature, this afternoon we inserted, have you completed and posted the state's COVID-19, I'm sorry, business self-certification requirement. And down below that, and down below that, to go further, is a note is the self-certification requirement with some, with the links to the state information.
Well, I'm fine with that. I mean, the earlier draft didn't have that. I'm fine with it. And I just want to make sure that in terms of this process, we have given the businesses all the information that they need, and they don't have to go looking for it somewhere else.
Just to chime in again, Madam Chair, I was going to say, I think the biggest thing here for everyone to remember is that these are the state's guidelines, that we were handed these guidelines by the state, and we're now simply trying to operate within the guidelines. I'm sure the idea is not to make anything stricter than what the state is saying. We just want to stay within those guidelines. So it's kind of your, now at the municipality level, I think it's kind of your discretion for some of it. But again, the state is the biggest piece of it for us, the state guidelines.
Well, it's not our discretion to override the state guidelines.
Right. I guess that's my point. Right.
What we're talking about here is putting a process in place that will allow us to make these things in a day or two, as opposed to, as Bob indicated, 6 to 8 weeks.
Correct.
I'm concerned that we still haven't resolved item number 11. And that does bother me. I mean, I'm all for the businesses being able to use a sidewalk or whatever. I just want to make sure we're not creating additional problems, either for property owners adjacent or for police or whatever. And that's the part that bothers me the most. I don't want to find us with other problems that were unanticipated.
Right. Well, I was going to say, I would say that would be part of each individual application. If they apply and they want to be on the sidewalk, then obviously, Mr. Giampietro for building is going to have to look at the zoning requirements. We'll have to look at the ADA piece of it. I would think, Chiefs of Fire would want to weigh in, the police would want to weigh in as to whether it makes sense. So I think it's up to the businesses at that point to come forward with what their plan is, and then we either say yes or no to that particularly, right?
Well, yes and no, but I have a concern there. I don't want to be denied. Take Saigon as an example. If they want to use the sidewalk, we all know it's a very narrow sidewalk. We ought to have a way, I would think, that we can allow them to use that sidewalk.
Right.
But I want to make sure from a legal perspective that we're not creating additional problems in some other way. That's all I'm looking for.
Seriously.
And we have a limited amount of time that we want to pass something like this. So, Kate, maybe you have some thoughts on this.
Yeah, so I think to Karen's point, so if you happen to be using public space as part of this outdoor space, this concept that you have for your business, it's going to be a two-step process. So you would have to get this license piece approved through the town administrator, through this delegation by the board, number one. And then number two, you have to get the license to use the public space. So that's an entirely separate document. I want it to be crystal clear to the public that that is something that only the Board of Selectmen can execute. So what would happen is for each business, so you approve this process and the 23 or whatever businesses come forward and they all
Right.
apply for it. 20 of the 23 may get their licenses and be able to operate because they have a private parking lot, while the other 3 may have to come back before the Board of Selectmen if they're using the public space to get that license agreement executed. So that's perhaps where the kind of greater scrutiny to the particular circumstances regarding the particular sidewalks, the dimensions, all that can be looked at, determined from the police whether it can be done safely, fire, Board of Health, all of that stuff. So just by referencing it in your policy doesn't eliminate that piece if you're using public property.
Well, then, the other concern is, the moment you're coming back to the select board, we have to have an open meeting on it. Everything you're talking about may sound reasonable. We may have to be concerned with a variety of issues, but then there's also a time involved, even if everybody tries to push it through. And that means that we as a select board have to be prepared to continually schedule a series of meetings to try to meet with this. So I leave it to the chair to think about the implications on that. I realize there are probably only
I
no
don't
more
think
than
there'll be
8.
many.
There could be more, I just don't know.
Yeah, so the governor's order unfortunately didn't waive the open meeting law as a requirement, and any time a public body meets, they have to be compliant with open meeting law. It's just the cards that were dealt in trying to help as many businesses that we can help, but within the constraints of the law. That piece is a bit more cumbersome for sure.
So that's just, again, that is only for when it's a public sidewalk or a public
Right,
space,
right.
not privately owned.
That's right.
Yeah, I mean, if you go around and look at the establishments,
Right.
I think the number of establishments that may be impacted by this are very small. So
Agreed.
maybe I'm wrong, but I think it's the 3 on Exchange Street. The others, as you look at them, seem to have other opportunities, although it's not always clear to me who owns the parking lot behind Ravings there.
The only other one I can think, Jim, is maybe Rock and Coal in that area. I don't know if that's, well, I guess
That's
it's
not a
not
public
public.
way.
It's not public though either, right? But it's a joint parking lot.
So I keep thinking of Victory Lane, Saigon,
Those are the ones,
whatever.
that's
Right.
yes, those 3 establishments there would seem to me to be the ones that have the biggest issue with the public sidewalk.
Okay. Let me ask town council, if a restaurant requests to use the sidewalk, is a public hearing required, notification of abutters? Is it
No,
a process?
because it's just, so although you're giving a property right away, it's only temporary and it's freely revocable, so it's not the same thing. So originally, people were saying we need to give a lease, and that's exactly what you don't want to have happen because you need town meeting approval for that, or it would be crazy. So a license is simply a contract. There's no notice requirements in the law. It's just a contract publicized. I mean, you may want to notify people just to let them know to hear their input, other business owners that are affected. But no, it's a simple 48-hour posting requirement.
I just want to call attention to 2 comments that are part of this chat for those of you who are on Zoom. All of its fabulous features. One, the comment by a resident and a journalist who wants everybody to know that the Italian Groceria on Exchange Street has in the past put out small tables and has had no problem with that. And the second is that our building commissioner, who's masquerading as his wife, wants everybody to remember that the Massachusetts Architectural Access Board, which is the agency that governs compliance for American for Disabilities Act, ADA, has a requirement for sidewalk widths that would require a variance for the 42-inch requirement, and we should probably ask him to chime in if there's something to say on that further, Mr. Giampetro.
Am I unmuted?
You are.
Yes.
Oh, okay. I don't have my wife here to direct me, you know what I mean? We've got to keep in mind that several years ago, we had a complaint from a disabled person, probably 14, 15 years ago when we were doing the sidewalks over on 109, from the, who complained to the AAB that the sidewalk wasn't wide enough down by the corner of Plain Street and 109, which we had a big investigation, and it was just a half-inch issue. And the AAB came down and said you should have applied for a variance for that half-inch issue. But we worked with the landowner to gain another half-inch, and we complied. So I want to keep in mind that, you know, somebody can complain about not getting a wheelchair through the requirements of a sidewalk. And that goes to the AAB, the Architectural Access Board, and they have investigators and attorneys which come in and investigate. Now, I don't know how this emergency order from the governor and all weighs into that aspect, but you have to be cognizant of that with those businesses down on Exchange Street. And there was some other comments about tables that are put there before and there was no problem with it. Well, I don't arbitrarily go around town and enforce zoning. 40A requires a written complaint. Although that might be a violation, I'm not going to go in there and arbitrarily go in there and give you a violation notice unless somebody files a written complaint. So there may be several violations around town. As one resident we had, Red Pettis, you remember him? He used to come in and say there's 398 violations in town. And I'd give him 398 forms to fill out. Then he'd throw them all on the floor and walk away. So there are several zoning violations around, and the way to mitigate that is through our laws, which is 40A, which requires a written form with somebody's signature and a date showing what the violation is, and then I investigate it. So, yes, there are a lot of businesses that have little tables out. During the summer, they poke them out there, and then they take them back in. It is, if they don't have a special permit from the planning board, they're not allowed to do that. If I don't get a violation, a complaint form, then, I don't investigate. So, for things that go along around town, the requirement is to fill out the forms. I'm not saying everybody filed 300 applications all at once, but I just want you to make sure that you know how that regulation works and how the AAB works. So I think Kate can help out in figuring out how the AAB requirements can fall into this emergency order. If there's any leeway that is given because of sidewalks and variances requiring, a lot less than 42 inches or putting something in the way. For me, I look at it as problematic. So that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, so absent from the governor's order is a waiver of the ADA, and I've had similar experiences with the Architectural Access Board. I had a facade of a downtown building that was being reconstructed and you needed scaffolding, and as a consequence, the sidewalk was much more narrow for passage, and so the city had to essentially create a sidewalk into the street to allow passage around that scaffolding. And again, that was a temporary situation similar to this, where you can get into some trouble. So certainly, if you're dealing with public spaces and the licensure of them, you're going to have to be careful and look at what the dimensions are and whether or not you can be compliant with the ADA.
Let me ask a question then. You just mentioned something about moving the parking spaces. Suppose if people, and I'll just take an example, hypothetical, Saigon would like to use the sidewalk. It turns out we can't get 42 inches. Suppose we just say, okay, there's a certain portion of the street that we will no longer allow parking in those spots, and we'll just move the sidewalk, if you will, out there just a bit so a wheelchair or whatever can get through without any problem. Is that doable?
Yeah, I think that's actually a creative solution. Another town that I'm working with did that exact same thing. It built out into the public right-of-way for where the cars go. And in fact, they had considered shutting down part of their main street, but it's a different setup than Millis for sure. That got tweaked a little bit, but they're shutting down half of their street and making it a one-way street for the time being. So there are creative solutions if you can accomplish it. There are 3 things to accomplish: the financial health of the restaurants and to try to bring them back to life, compliance with safety protocols to protect the residents against COVID infection, and safety protocols to allow residents with disabilities, but also just residents without disabilities to safely pass and repass. So There are creative ways to do it, and I think if you're open to it, solutions may be there.
It seems to me that with Exchange Street, we could just shut down some of that parking that's on the street, because only Victory Lane owns the parking immediately adjacent to their restaurant. But we could, I think, without too much trouble, maybe do something like that. I think there's a real public sentiment to save these businesses. And I think it's up to us as government to do everything we can to set up safety, but to also set up success.
Madam Chair, if I may,
Yeah.
just to touch upon and go back to item 11, I think, which was the item that sparked the conversation. I think, and certainly Mr. Weiss can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the reason item 11 is in there is simply to direct those businesses that have an interest in utilizing public space, that there is an avenue to appeal to the select board for consideration, but that consideration will not be done as quickly as just a turnaround of a permit on private property. So I think it was done more as a kind of a guide to those businesses, and certainly we could add language in there to make those businesses understand that that type of application would not have a one-day turnaround time. That could take upwards of a couple of weeks to institute that, depending on the board's schedule and addressing any concerns that the public safety officials have in regards to any proposal to use the public property. But I think that's on a case-by-case basis, and there's no way that one form can really delineate exactly how each of those applications might be handled. So I think it was there as a guidance document. I mean, I suppose it could be removed, but, we wanted to address the concerns of those restaurant owners that may not have any private property options to go outside.
And that's exactly the situation for Saigon and potentially for the Italian Groceria. And I think we have to do something that's all-inclusive. I don't think we can have to say to them, sorry, you lose because of the way you're situated. I think we have to have a policy that gives them some leeway. And I'm just wondering if any of our public safety officials can speak to the idea of Mr. Germain of blocking off some of the parking on Exchange Street. I did see some people on here. I'm scrolling through. Are they still here? Yes. Either of the chiefs. Oh, I see one's weighing in.
Madam Chair?
Please, sir.
In terms of Saigon and where Isabella's is, I would agree that there's an alleyway there that would offer some seating. In regard to putting tables in the street in some parking spots, I mean, as long as there's appropriate signage, I don't have a problem taking over a couple spots, but I do worry about the safety of people when you put tables in the street, basically where cars park. So I would try to utilize as much of the space around the buildings as possible so we can accomplish the businesses getting back at doing what they do. You know what I'm saying? But I do worry about putting tables out in the street without appropriate markings and whatnot.
No, I don't think anybody would. I think we'd be looking to you to help us to cordon off that area. And I also think it would be kind of tough to coexist parking with outside seating. I think what we would be saying is we're going to dedicate this as an emergency measure to give restaurants that don't have the opportunity to have outside seating exactly that. And I don't believe anybody would mind being asked to walk a little further in order to support the business's returns.
And the one other thing that I would like to just remind everybody is we do have a school on Lavender Street with handicapped kids, and they have been vocal in the past because these sidewalks weren't appropriate. So we just have to keep that in mind because those folks do use that sidewalk quite often.
Well, I guess my suggestion is that since, at least with respect to Exchange Street, the universe is pretty small, might be worthwhile to reach out to the three owners and see what they might want to try. Because just because we create some space doesn't mean that the business owners are saying, well, 5 tables are fine, but I'm not going to get enough people to come and it's not worth my while. So I'm not suggesting that, I could be wrong, but I think those are the three really that are most affected by this sidewalk thing. And I'm perfectly willing to work with them. I'd like to know what they need rather than trying to speculate.
Madam Chair, I think that's a good idea, and I'd be perfectly willing to reach out to the business owners to let them know. We're just finding out what they would like, if they need the sidewalk and what their plans would be. I'd be glad to reach out to them.
I don't know all the names because some people are on here without names, but are any of the affected businesses on Exchange Street here, and are they willing to chime in?
Carrie Barrett, Victory Lane.
Hi, Carrie.
Hi, Carrie.
Hi, how are you?
Welcome back.
Thanks. So
Can you
I think parking on this, if you put parking the tables on the street, where are these people going to park that are going to sit at these tables?
Well, speaking for myself, I can walk, but I think people are going to be parking on side streets in order to accommodate the loss of parking right in the front.
Madam Chair, there is the municipal parking lot is right behind the Exchange Street restaurants. So it's almost like a strip mall that has a big parking lot behind it. So I would think they would be able to park there. It's not a very far walk. In fact, they go between the library and the old police up in Niagara. It's a very nice walk.
I think it'd be great if we all had a few tables to put in front, as long as, I'm not going in front of, Dan's barbershop, the dog groomer, or someone's coming in front of my property or my parking lot. I think if we all have a couple of tables in front of what I would consider our building, our real estate, and didn't spread it all the way down the sidewalk, that it should be fine.
And just to chime in again, this is Karen. One of the things I did read in the ABCC, of course, I can't put my finger on it right now, as far as when you're submitting your kind of floor plan for the outdoor seating, it does say that it has to be cordoned off. There has to be one entrance, one exit, so that people can't just randomly come to a table. They have to be able to go through an entrance into this kind of proposed seating area. So you could do that. You could have three separate kind of seating areas in the front.
I think one of the problems with this number 11 that I see, and I will admit, I lifted it from another town, which lifted it from another town.
Right.
I think it actually covers two issues. One is, if you're going to serve liquor on a sidewalk, you're going to serve alcohol, it's got to be from the building that's right adjacent to it. That was one. And then the second part is right at that comma, subject to execution of a license agreement. So you can also come out onto a public property with a proper licensing. So I think there's two things it's trying to cover there, and that may cause some of the confusion.
Attorney Fedorov, is there some language that you could give us, and maybe it's a separate from number 11, maybe it's an 11A or B, that specifically defines a process for these businesses that otherwise are going to be bankrupt? If we don't provide a solution for Saigon and for the Italian Groceria, they don't own a parking facility of their own, they will just be out of business. So I think we have to be able to do something.
Yeah, I think, and to Bob's point, I think just separating Section 11 into two pieces, that the consumption of beer and wine is approved in this process, and then a separate section that says, to the extent that the outdoor seating area will be located on town-owned property, it shall be subject to the execution of a separate license agreement to use town-owned spaces through Board of Selectmen approval. Just two bullets. Break it right up.
Yeah. So it'll be an 11 and a 12.
Yeah,
Right, and basically 12 would start at that comma, subject to, and what Kate said.
yeah, so it should read, like the first one says, the consumption of beer, wine, and spirits under this process may be allowed for provided that it is purchased from the restaurant for on-premise consumption, period. And then the second part is, to the extent that town-owned spaces, e.g. sidewalks, municipal parking lots, under this process will be utilized, said approval shall be subject to the execution of a license agreement for town-owned spaces at the discretion and upon the approval of the Board of Selectmen, or Select Board.
So the Saigon and the Italian Groceria do not sell liquor.
Correct.
So,
They're not licensed to sell liquor currently, correct.
that's right. So they don't sell liquor. So if they have how's that going to work? If they have a license from us to serve meals at tables in the public way, where does the alcohol come from?
So the alcohol's in the first part. Like, watch. Can I?
They don't sell. They don't have alcoholic licenses.
No. So the alcohol is just for, alcohol applies to this section to everyone who has an alcohol license.
Right.
And then the second section is town-owned property, which is related to either alcohol or food. So if I can I edit that, Karen, this document here on the computer screen?
No. I can.
So if, like, watch how this will look, Jim.
So tell me exactly what you want me to put.
Let me get rid of this screen. Hang on. Okay. So number 11 should
Yeah.
read, the consumption of beer, wine, and spirits
Yeah.
in the outdoor seating area approved under this process
Okay, give me one here. Seating area approved. Yeah.
may be allowed with the stipulation that, and that, you can even cut and paste,
Yeah.
because it's all
Oh,
down
yeah.
below.
Then it is purchased from the adjacent. Okay.
Yep.
That it is purchased. Sorry. From the adjacent restaurant. But you don't want it to say takeout order, right?
Yeah, and we'll say for on-premise consumption.
The Saigon restaurant, which has been, as the chair indicated, a staple business in our town for decades, does not and never has had a liquor license.
Yeah, but this doesn't have to do with.
Hold on.
Okay.
People who go there, their own bottle of wine or their own beer,
Yeah, it's a BYOB, Kate.
and they drink it in the restaurant.
BYOB.
Correct.
Well,
I mean, my reaction on this at this point in time is we are more than happy, as the chair indicated, to reach out to this business and see if we can figure out a way to allow them to have tables to help them resuscitate their business. To create some convoluted process for one-off, I don't think is a useful exercise. I mean, if they want our help, we need to reach out to them and say, what can we do to make it viable for you guys? So, I mean, I don't know why I think this is solution in search of a problem, frankly,
but Jim, to your point, that second step is in the licensing process, because Saigon is an example of one who is going to use the public space if they go outside. So, I mean,
Right.
all of that can be vetted. So here you're just directing them to say that if you're going to use a public space, either for food or for drinks, then that's a separate process. And I
so
think
we can license them, you say.
yeah,
We don't sell alcohol.
no, yes, not license them for liquor license, but license the use of your
Use of the
town
space.
property.
Okay.
Yeah, and we
Okay.
can spell that out in it's also called a license, but a license agreement. So lesser than a lease.
So the only hitch then is the board needs to be able to, quickly schedule a meeting to grant the license.
That's right.
So it'd be good if we could reach out to them and figure out whether they really need this. And then we could work together to set up a meeting so we can grant the license.
And to Bob's point, because I think it was the police chief who said that there is a school for handicapped children, some of whom have physical limitations. I find, and so when I had my situation that I was explaining to you before with the Architectural Access Board, the stakeholders came to us and said, listen, these are some measures that I think would make it suitable for us. So I think if Bob could reach out to that school and see if they had some thoughts on it as well, if there's an appetite from Saigon and the Little Kitchen, it would be helpful.
That can be done easily enough. Are they even in session because of, we'll have to find out.
I think they are year-round, Bob.
But now they're not allowed to.
Oh, yeah, good question.
Yeah,
Maybe not.
yeah.
I think, and I'm not an expert on this, but I think there were certain schools, especially schools who helped children with special needs who were it was flexible with them. It wasn't the same as shutting down all the public schools, but I don't profess to be an expert on that at all. But
It seems to me that where we're headed is, in large part, almost an elimination of 11 and saying, it's up to the board. Come to the board. We will work with you to try to resolve any issues associated with things like the use of the sidewalk and consumption of liquor under those conditions. And why get too specific with it? We know that there are only a couple of instances where this is even likely to happen. We don't know anything beyond it. So can we not be general and say, we'll work with you to resolve this?
Pete, can I say one thing though? Karen, can you make that screen go up again?
Yeah, what page, Kate?
So where you were editing before. And I'm not sure if yeah, right there at 11. So, and let me move this screen a little bit so I can see that. Okay, so I think it's important to notify them because really part and parcel of the alcohol is that we have to hit home that this is for the people who are selling prepared food, who have this food permit, so it's not for bars. So I think keeping that piece, which doesn't have to do with at all with public property, it says the consumption of beer and wine and the consumption of beer, wine, and spirits in the outdoor seating area approved under this process may be allowed with the stipulation that it is purchased from the adjacent restaurant, strike town-owned spaces, strike sidewalks, keep under this process, and go strike all the way to with the stipulation that it is purchased from the restaurant as part of, purchased from the restaurant for on-site consumption. Because that's the real piece. We need food. We can't, it's not intended to be a gathering place as an outdoor bar only.
As part of the, sorry, Kate, under the process with the stipulation that it is purchased from the adjacent restaurant as part of consumption?
Oh, sorry, just strike that, and after process would strike with the stipulation all the way down to the period and instead put for on-site consumption.
Okay.
And then let's read that together and see if it makes sense, because doing it on the fly is like crazy.
Yeah, I know, I'm like, pardon my poor typing.
And it could be, to Jim's point, you can say the consumption of beer, wine, and spirits in the outdoor seating area for existing licensees, right? That hits it home.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's fine.
So right after spirits,
Sorry.
for the licensees,
For existing
for
licensees.
existing licensees.
Should I say ABCC licensees?
Why don't you say chapter 138, section 12 licensees?
You're funny. What was that chapter? 138?
138, section 12, yep.
I'll fix it after, but
Shift 6, option 6.
I was just showing up.
Licensees.
oh, sorry.
Yeah,
You
licenses.
guys are testing me today.
Yes, we are.
And then for 12, if you want just to direct it, to give them a directive, use of public space, see the selectmen, or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can fix that.
Must be approved through the select board. I don't know. We can fix it after,
Yeah.
as long as we can agree on the content here. Madam Chair, if I can ask one other question of Kate?
Yep, let's keep going.
Kate, how does this work for, so they come in, they get approved through everything. What does that do as far as timing for the alcohol license? If they're allowed to serve until 1 a.m., are they still allowed to serve until 1 a.m. on the street?
Yeah, so this is my suggestion that because you've got a different set of parameters here, outside eating and drinking have different impacts on the other localities. Correct. I would leave that as a condition of approval that the town administrator makes based on guidance from the chiefs and the Board of Health and the building department, because it's one thing if you're a restaurant and you're in the middle of the industrial park or something and you're not bothering anyone, you can drink till all hours of the night within your license. But if you happen to be a neighborhood restaurant and you're right next to, a residential development, there may be different constraints. So I think it's better to leave some flexibility there to address the particular impacts of that restaurant.
Okay.
On the other on the neighbors. My suggestion.
Well, again, if you look at what actually exists, I mean, the one that is certainly in the neighborhood is Jasper Hill. That's surrounded by homes, so, the rest of the...
Same with Exchange Street. Exchange Street has residences too.
Residents there too, so, yeah, we have to be somewhat careful.
So I had one town that just artificially made up outdoor hours for their restaurants under this order, and it was like last call 8, close at 9. But I don't know if that's necessarily, it's so helpful to be rigid when you can be flexible and address the particulars for each circumstance, but it gives some wiggle room, but it gives some wiggle room. So pros and cons of both. Oh, another policy consideration that you want to think about. Generally in permitting, you usually say, hey, everyone has to be fully paid on their taxes, water, sewer, whatever town bills they have. The policy question is, do you want to stick with your guns on this? This is for people who are current, or is that the other side of that is there have been people who are constrained in their business operations, so as a consequence they were less liquid and less able to pay, and this is the way to get them back on the street. So we're going to waive compliance with that for this temporary order. It's a policy question that you probably should answer, and then that one has to be uniform for sure.
For me personally, I would be in favor of waiving fees because we want to get these businesses up and running.
Well, you didn't say waive the fees, you just said waive the requirement that they be current. And from my perspective, all of these licenses will have to be renewed at the end of the year anyway. So
right.
I would not impose an additional finding for this one.
Okay.
I think that's overkill.
Yeah, and to your point, Jim, these actually expire November 2nd. Unless this order is lifted by the governor.
Well, the outdoor does.
Outdoor, yeah.
Licenses, hopefully they'll be doing great business as
Yes.
it's cold and everybody's inside.
Right.
Yeah.
It's not like we're just, we have plenty of opportunities to ask folks to be current. I don't think we should do it in this one.
Yeah.
Okay. Sounds good. Loring, any?
Yep.
I don't know if there's
no, I'm
anything.
fine.
And you have any
So,
questions? I can't see.
Before you stop editing, is there
No.
consensus from the board that number 4 should be changed from 24 hours to 1 business day? Does that make sense? So if they submitted a Friday at 5 o'clock?
I think that makes more sense.
That's
Okay.
fine.
Do you want it to say within 1 business day?
Or the next business day.
Yeah, the next business day is fine.
Get it in on Tuesday, we'll get it back to you on Wednesday.
Yeah.
That's our hope.
Our best effort.
Yeah, well, we said, there's some wiggle room there, but.
Yes. And just to say again to the restaurant owners and everyone who's listening out there, we are trying, we certainly do not want to impede or add more restrictions. We are simply trying to make this as streamlined as possible with what our directive from the state.
Is it clear from this that, and I think it is, there's a reference in the form with phone number for Bob Weiss. For further questions, please contact. I would suggest that we just add further questions or assistance in filling out this form, please contact. Because some of the people make can be avoided by just a quick call or at least a little bit of a consultation so that we don't find that there's a flaw in the filing when we could have resolved it with a phone call. Is that reasonable, Bob, or?
I think that is fine. If I can't answer their question, we have a lot of people at Town Hall who can, and I can always refer people to the
Sure.
the right folks. And I can see questions about the the social distancing, the guidance, the training that they need. So I know who I would refer people
Okay.
refer this on to.
And certainly, just to add, Mr. McCaffrey, happy to help, anybody who needs assistance with this. We'll do what we can to help out. And like Bob said, if Bob can't answer it, it might be something they can reach out to me, and I can reach out to whoever it is, the police chief or building commissioner to get the answers for them, so.
It seems to me that the easiest thing to do would be to list all the potential people who might be called and maybe provide a sequence. If you're calling about something with the Board of Health, you can go there. If you're calling something about, you can
Certainly.
define it. Public safety, this, and this. Feed those into Bob so that, people aren't bothering either of the
Yep,
chiefs.
that makes sense.
And if you're calling about something having to do with building permitting, obviously that would be our building commissioner.
So you're suggesting putting each staff person's contact information in there for particular questions?
Sure, to make it more convenient, one-stop shopping for our business
Yeah.
owners.
You can add it here or at some place, that's fine.
Yeah.
Just make sure on the final form, Karen, that it needs headers and footers that show page 1, page 2, page 3, or whatever.
Yes.
So that they're really connect, and then they also need the name of the business put into the headers. Because if they get
But now
printed,
without a website, it's probably useful just to say all phone numbers and contacts are listed on our website.
Yep.
Yep, either way, certainly get it out there.
Yeah, like just having a point of contact is a way to focus.
Right.
And that doesn't mean we shouldn't also tell folks that if you have a specific question about, the Board of Health, you feel free to call, the Board of Health. I don't want folks to be dialing for dollars and not get a response. I guess that's the...
Okay.
Are there any more comments from my colleagues before I ask any of our public safety officials or our Board of Health director to weigh in on these recommendations? Peter or Mr. McCaffrey, do you have...
All set.
Do either of our chiefs want to weigh in on this? You guys already participated in the development of these guidelines, and we thank you so much for that. And I know it's been a little busy of late. I'm just wondering if there's anything that you want to add for the community discussion here.
I'm good, thank you.
And our fire chief, I don't even know if he's still on. I'm scrolling through. Yes, he is. Does he have anything to add? Yes, he does.
No, Madam Chair, I think I'm good with the discussion so far. I think it comes down to a case-by-case basis, and we'll deal with it as it comes.
Yep.
And our Board of Health director is going to make sure we can get ice cream, Mr. John McVeigh.
Yeah, ice cream's good, especially at this time of year. Absolutely. No, I just had a few comments, and I did email Bob Weiss on them regarding the form, defining tents, just so people are aware of what that means. I think it should be clarified. Canopies are allowed, but tents, as a classic tent with 4 sides, becomes
John, I'm thinking that maybe I'll just eliminate the word tents altogether.
Well, yeah, maybe even just put canopies so people know that they can have a canopy, for sun shelter and maybe some rain. And then just some other, they're not even corrections, they're more additions that I just emailed Bob regarding the form. But other than that, as the chief, fire chief mentioned, we'll see as it comes along. We'll see the questions that are generated. I'm sure there'll be a few.
So on the tents, from the perspective of just compliance with the state, you are permitted to have tents with sides, provided 50% of those sides are up, so I think you can roll some up. I think the one benefit of a tent is that that if it's a windy, rainy day, you can put down one flap and it's coming in that direction. And for residences, if you can try to dampen some of the noise if you close the flap on the resident side. I don't know how it's configured in Millis, but you are allowed to have 50% walls per the order. The Board of Health may be stricter in that they want better air circulation, and I would leave that up to them, but just for pure state compliance, you can't have a tent. The other thing about a tent, unlike a canopy, is I think you might need a building permit for that, so it makes it a little more cumbersome, but it might make it nicer. But John, I defer to you on whether or not you should have sides.
Well, yeah, I think that definition went back and forth, and that definitely has changed then, because a couple of weeks ago it was a canopy, so maybe that has changed with DPH's recommendation. That's from our end, as long as the DPH is fine with that, and there's no added restrictions once you put any sides on there, as far as table distances and how many people can be in there, as it's defined as an enclosure, an indoor space, then it's fine. I mean, that's from our end, other departments, they've got permitting requirements, that's beyond the Board of Health's purview.
For Mr. Gianpietro, our building commissioner,
If I may, Madam Chair, if I can just get back to John real quickly. John, you asked me to replace the word temporary modified restaurant operations part with, I'm sorry, you asked me to put posters into as a replacement. I think under the note, the self-certification, and is that the second second bullet down?
Yes.
Okay, Karen, could you do that now? Because
Where are you looking?
under self-certification requirements.
It's the third bullet down.
Yeah, the third bullet down. And you want to, well, John, why don't you tell Karen what you want?
The third bullet on self-certification, it says all businesses must have training for employees. It should be posters for employees in their work is describing protocols.
Okay.
So, and I think the phone number, the only other question I have is the phone number. If you go to the next page, you scroll down.
Hold on.
I wasn't sure whose phone number that is. It says John McVeigh, and then it has this 906 phone number. I'm not sure who that is.
Yeah, that's
Isn't that your
that's
direct line, John?
Yeah, you don't want to direct in word dial on here. What's your 376 number, John?
Was
7042.
Thank you. There you go. Sorry, Bob. I didn't catch that one. So now it's just a matter of the board approving this and allowing the town administrator to be the official sign-off. Is that correct, Kate? Sorry, Lauren.
I would say yes.
Of the process and to delegate the authority to issue the permits to the town administrator based on the recommendations of the appropriate department heads. Something like that.
There you go.
And I guess I would wonder, we're heading into summer. It seems to me it probably wouldn't be unreasonable to say, or his assign, or their assign. If they can't be there and they meet all the criteria, is there any reason why he couldn't designate somebody to do this on his behalf?
Yeah, his designee, you can say.
And I was just going to ask, there's a comment on the whole tent thing, and I think the word canopy, I don't think of my four-sided on stilts tent with no sides as a canopy, and I don't know that anybody does. So we could just describe a tent, and indicate what that is. But since the state has built it into the regulation, I'm wondering of our building commissioner, is there a way to streamline whatever permit you're saying is needed, given the fact that the state has provided for this versus us just spelling out two-sided? I was going to ask Mr. Gianpietro to weigh in a friendly business kind of way.
Friendly business. Oh, that's a tough one. Okay, so there is no waiver on the building code, right? So building code is building code, and it does require a building permit for a tent. So we can expedite that as soon as you fill out the application. The fire chief and I can issue a permit. I mean, you can waive the fee if you want. The selectmen can waive the fee for the permit. That'd be what, $90? Once we get all the information on the tent, then we can go out and inspect it, make sure they have the fire certificate, and tent's properly installed, and we can approve it. But there is a requirement for a building permit for all tents.
To town council, how does that jive with the state policy on this, in terms of one superseding the other? And then is there a separate statement that would need to be made in here if we agree to waive any permit for a tent?
So what the governor's order speaks to is the zoning compliance, which would be your special permits, your variances, because think about what all the things that would be implicated. You're taking parking for seating, so now you're not compliant with parking. You need a special permit for outdoor seating. So all of those kinds of permits are one thing, but he's right. He didn't waive the building code per the order. So it should be a quick process, though. And certainly if you want to add a line, there's no fee. We waive the fee for the permit for the modified restaurant operations permit as well as the building permit. That's fine, too.
I think we should specify it and attach it to the subject of a tent or canopy so people understand what it's specific to. I would be in favor of waiving the fee for that. I defer to my colleagues. Gentlemen,
Anyone?
Mr. McCaffrey, would you be in favor of waiving a fee for any sort of building permit that is required for an inspection of a tent or canopy structure?
Yes, I don't see a problem with that.
Mr. Jermaine?
I have no problem with that.
Okay, so if we could just have a line in there that specifies tent, indicating what it is and what it is not in terms of number of sides, and/or as a canopy, and that, but whatever the name of the building permit probably needs to be identified in there, if there's a specific name for it, to our building commissioner.
Just tent permit.
Tent permit? Okay.
And if you want, Maureen, too, in that same section, just so people have an easy to read document where all the information's in one place, I can email Bob the language for the flaps, the side flaps. It says something along the lines of, and I looked to see if I had it, but I don't have it in front of me. It's like 50% of the perimeter must remain uncovered or something like that. But I can give Bob the exact language from the guidance. If you want to add that to the section.
Yeah, we can put that in there probably with the notes on self-certification requirements. So that'll go in that section.
Mr. Jermaine, did you have any other specific questions before I open it up to the business community here?
Not directly. I have one question. When we get ready to approve this, do we have to sign anything? Is there some sheet we sign, or are we just verbally approving this process?
I would defer to the town administrator on that.
You are just voting to approve the policy in the permit application. You don't need to sign any actual documents. Just an affirmative vote of the board is what we're looking for this evening.
Yeah, right. We just want you to approve this so that we can move forward tomorrow.
I'm going to invite members of the business community whose businesses have been hanging from tenterhooks. If you have specific questions and would like to chime in, the easy way to do it is to raise your hand using Zoom, but if you just want to chime in, we'll try and make sure we get to you. Is there anybody here that wants to say anything to the town government in terms of what you need going forward or what this process represents in terms of new life for you? The floor is yours. Hello? Anybody?
I think they're waiting for the approved permit is what I think they're waiting for.
Well, I'm inviting their input. Are there any questions? Well, you don't want us to approve something that you haven't had input in. So is there anybody who has some specific input, concerns, questions before we do in fact approve this? Because this is the time to have your valued input integrated into this discussion.
Carrie Barrett, Victory Lane.
Thank you, Carrie. Thank you for being patient with the whole process and for hanging tough.
No, I understand. Just a quick question, I'm going to do my whole drawing and everything. Things like, I get table seats like tents or fencing. Is that mandatory? Are these just suggestions?
Town council? I think safety things are mandatory, right?
It's not at all mandatory. It's just to make it more appetizing. But if you do elect to have a tent or a covering, that's when the restrictions come in and you say you can have a tent, but don't make it like the inside. So the barriers you definitely need in order to be compliant with the ABCC patio regulations. So you can even Google it if you want to Google it. It's called ABCC Patio Guidance. And they require barriers so you can see who's inside the restaurant and who's not inside the restaurant. So who are you serving? The barriers also serve a different purpose of providing a safe area for the restaurant, the folks enjoying themselves at the restaurant. So that's the twofold purpose for that. But you don't have to have an awning, especially since it's going to be expensive. It might be, and in all likelihood, very short-lived. Certainly no longer lived than November 2nd. So it's at your discretion.
Kate, what was that address again? ABCC?
I don't know the address. If you Google it, it's ABCC patio guidance.
I think, and actually just to add, Kate, I did email that to, if you did not get that, you can send me an email, but I did forward that to all of the, whoever has an ABCC license that I'm aware of. So Carrie, you should have that, hopefully.
Okay.
And just a reminder, so once you put this in, we will be sending the application along with that map to the ABCC. We'll be saying it's approved, but that doesn't mean that they may not come checking to make sure that if you said you're serving at 10 tables, you're serving at 10 tables.
Okay.
Just FYI.
Carrie, do you have any other questions?
I think I'm good right now, thanks.
And what is your plan, assuming that you turn on a dime with all your paperwork? Can you just share with the community what your plans are?
I'm going to try to keep it behind the building for the most part, maybe a couple tables up front. I'm probably not going to keep like the 1 a.m. hours, but probably a little bit later than 8 o'clock. I'll still do the takeout, curbside pickup.
Yeah.
So to keep, mostly, try to keep most of the patrons out back for the most part.
Anybody else who would like to ask a question or instruct or advise the government on how we can be helpful to you? Anyone? No one.
Let's approve it.
I think so. I would like to make a motion that the select board approve the temporary modified restaurant operations permit and application process with the specific changes that were enumerated this evening and have been dynamically compiled, which means we won't see that final document probably until tomorrow, but to approve in substance what has been discussed tonight.
Second, we also needed to grant the licensing authority to the town administrator. If you want to do that in a separate motion.
Sure.
Or their designate, or his designate, right?
Well, I'll second the main motion.
So the main motion is on the policy and the application process. I will poll the board. Mr. McCaffrey?
Yes.
Mr. Jermaine?
Yes.
Ms. Barnes, yes. And now to my colleague's point, make a motion that we authorize the town administrator or his designee to execute both the policy and application procedure as just approved. And I need a second.
I think we should specifically give him the local licensing authority. I think we should use those words. So I'd amend it and second it.
That's fine. As amended, I will poll the board. Mr. McCaffrey?
Yes.
Mr. Jermaine?
Yes.
Ms. Barnes, yes. It is a go for business in Millis. We want to wish everybody great success. We want to encourage all of our community to frequent these businesses. There's a lot of care and feeding that now needs to go back in the direction of the business. So be thoughtful about how long you actually stay there. If you're not actively, our days of kind of being leisurely, I think the business owners specific to restaurants would agree that they would really appreciate the opportunity to turn the tables, is the term in the restaurant parlance. So please be cognizant of that, be generous. And if you can support these businesses, they would be very grateful. I want to thank every town citizen who weighed in on this. I want to thank every business owner who has been patient with a process beyond everybody's control or ability to predict. I want to thank all of the town employees who really rallied and turned on a dime. I will tell you that for something to be done this fast in government, it has been like pushing the QE2 with our nose, but we turned it on a dime. So congratulations and best wishes to all of these businesses, and we'll get this document executed when, Karen, tomorrow?
Tomorrow.
Okay, we'll all be watching for it. Thank you
yep.
all very much, and please go to the town website as well as the town Facebook page where we will continue to be making announcements supportive of all the businesses in town and specific to these regulations. And with that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Madam Chair, I move that we adjourn.
Mr.
I'll
Jermaine?
second.
Moved and seconded. I will poll the board. Mr. McCaffrey?
Yes.
Mr. Jermaine?
Yes.
Ms. Barnes, yes. And our next select board meeting will be Monday the 15th. Thank you all so much.
Thank you. Good luck, guys.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thanks.